Capitalism and religion, namely Christianity, is a complete given and a complete structural orthodoxy in the West. In the contemporary nature of our society, namely the United States, religion seems to be completely integrated into the very fabric of governing and politics as a whole. And as time goes on, this does seem to be fading away a little bit, even among the contemporary right. Religion still holds an extreme amount of institutionalized stock in the political systems in which we live. In our modern day, it really does beg the question as to what happened during the Enlightenment era. What happened to the fundamental constructs of separation of church and state? And more directly, why are we hearing such a massive defense of modernity and the Enlightenment by way of the very contemporary status quo politics of today? If anything, much of the very specific tenets of the Enlightenment haven't even came to fruition in our contemporary world. And while these are all wonderful questions that inevitably arise from discussions around politics and religion, that's not what this video is going to be about. This video is going to be about what religion could be and is the most compatible for capitalism, and what does our current activity mirror today in a religious context. And this guy right here, Slavoj Žižek, gives a pretty interesting analysis of this very question itself. And within this very analysis, Žižek gives an incredibly interesting answer. An answer that is probably best heard from him.
Here, the predominant version today, this is my prediction that the future lies with Buddhism, but I'm critical about it. It's not so much authentic Buddhism as a kind of a popular Western Buddhism. Now, I will just slowly recapitulate what I already said 2 days ago, but I will move further. What I mean is something else. What I mean is that we should ask this simple question. We are entering a new era, global capitalism and so on, and it's a very traditional Marxist question. What type of spirituality, self-experience, ideological self-understanding fits perfectly today's capitalism? I think that Buddhism can do the job much better than Christianity.
Every stretch of the imagination, this is kind of mind-blowing. How could a religion based on self-reflection, based upon internal meditation, a radical evolution of subjectivity, ever be as compatible with a rigorous system such as capitalism? An economic system with almost a social Darwinistic tone to it, one where tangible value isn't necessarily internalized, yet externalized based upon the productivity that you can provide? In every sense of the imagination, this seems completely wrong. Our original theoretical conception of capitalism and religion initially stemmed from Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Max Weber's ultimate thesis surrounding this work was that the development of Calvinistic Protestantism ultimately led up to capitalism, that the very spirit of capitalism is founded upon the very ethics of hard work and progress. From this very perspective, this system seems like one molded from and for Christians. This is the very established notion within capitalism and religion. But in today's capitalistic world, the question does arise. Is this just an extremely archaic presupposition? Is this really the state of capitalism today? Žižek would answer this precisely as no.
I think that if Weber were to be alive today, he would have written a book, something like Taoist Ethics and the Spirit of Global Capitalism. It fits much better.
Now, it's important to note that Žižek isn't necessarily talking about Buddhism from an orthodox perspective, rather a new emergence of structural Buddhism, one that ultimately mimics Buddhism in form and aesthetic, but not necessarily in content. Ultimately, the elastic and malleable form of Buddhism, one's ultimate ability to adapt. But Žižek would ultimately argue there is a reason why there is a spirituality, there is a mode of being that is in demand in Western capitalism. It's that capitalism is ultimately extremely fragile. At any moment, we could have another 2008, a Great Depression, or worse, we could have a 2020 COVID pandemic and the continual market crash, with a government that ultimately tells you to fuck off for only $1,200. Ultimately, capitalism is a system that is systemically fragile while also rendering the individual as fragile. Because in this capitalistic mode of being, there is very little tangible control. You are subject to the very nature of the market and ultimately at the whims of a very select few. Thus, a very new demand of separating yourself from those woes, separating yourself from the very core desire and the like. You, the subject, do not matter in the same context of, say, a Christian subject. You are a part of something larger, much more elastic. But Žižek would argue with a lack of actual internalized care, there can be a reflective element of a lack of care in the larger social stratosphere when concerning larger issues, at least on the individual level. Žižek actively uses the example of a sect of Buddhists in Japan, roughly around the size of 10 million, who were completely on board with Imperial Japan's goals, no matter the extreme violence and no matter the horrid intentions. Žižek would ultimately claim that we need some mythic religious function in order to justify killing, in order to justify doing terrible things, and very much more specifically, being able to adapt correctly to capitalist endeavors despite any moral wrongdoing, and despite specific harm. This Buddhist form of negating yourself into practical nothingness, of molding yourself into the world around you, gives perfect leeway for this phenomena to exist. And mind you, this really just comes in the form of Buddhism. As many would argue, this probably isn't exact Buddhism, but as we see, it could possibly become a developmental form of it. I'll just say Siddhartha Gautama probably would not have been very cool with Imperial Japan. But with this newfound global, Buddhist, capitalistic world that we are ultimately living in, some examples do come to mind. The modern capitalistic self-help guru, with a really hip modern facade, is one of them. We are currently seeing an evolution away from the typical hard work, inspirational meta, and instead we are looking at internalized knowledge, internalized self-care, and ultimately understanding your integration with the world around you.
But you know what I like a lot more than materialistic things? Knowledge. In fact, I'm a lot more proud of these 7 new bookshelves that I had to get installed to hold 2,000 new books that I bought.
In the world of self-help, we have seen the evolution from the Max Weber perspective of hard work and Protestant work ethics to the Žižekian outlook of a modern global capitalistic Taoist movement. One explicit example is the YouTuber Devin Nash. He is a self-devout Buddhist, yet explicitly is a streamer, internet, online content creator, self-help guru.
He has a truly great mindset, which is that he understands that life will take care of him in some way, and the value that he provides will return to him.
His entire channel is dedicated to understanding the sphere around streaming on Twitch, understanding certain analytics, understanding certain success strategies, and the like. And this is not to rag on him whatsoever. He seems to understand the sphere around streaming and his core objectives better than just about anyone on YouTube. But like a ton of other self-help gurus, there is zero discussion around the socioeconomic conditions and structures that surround people's lives. There is very little discussion around the political systems in which we live, and typically from his perspective, most of the woes, most of the lack of success that individuals encounter is directly from them. Or at least this is how he and other self-help gurus typically convey this problem. So like Žižek would convey and argue, there is nothing more efficient at immersing yourself into the very capitalistic meta, the understanding of human psychology, market structures, more than typical Buddhist outlooks. But there's something else that we're missing here. And this is the single most important thing about this video. It's not about the new emerging structure of Buddhism, rather it's the form of how we look at capitalism. When Herbert Marcuse wrote his book One-Dimensional Man, he coined the concept of repressive desublimation. The core of this concept is to articulate the elasticity of capitalism and how it continually adapts. Any progress, any new social progressive endeavor is ultimately repackaged into the commodity itself in capitalism. This is why capitalism is ultimately a prevailing force. Any new social progress, any new demands are essentially repackaged into something that does not hurt the status quo. One example of this being the complete social progress we've seen in the past 50 years. The acceptance of LGBTQ rights, of modern feminist movements, of new forms of aesthetics such as tattoos in the workforce. And while these new things of progress are actually good, it ultimately sells the people a false bag of goods, a false bag of progress. Because these new forms of social acceptance do not really hurt the status quo in any way. In this context, the traditional outlook of capitalism being one extreme rigorous structure is pretty false. Instead, this is what capitalism is.
I am diversity at Boeing.
We are diversity at Boeing.
I am diversity at Boeing.
At Walmart, we're thinking big about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is about you, your unique thoughts and ideas, your aspiration.
That is the very importance of understanding compatibility with spirituality and capitalism. It ultimately gives us a larger look at what capitalism really is. It is an elastic, malleable force to be reckoned with, one that continually adapts. This is why, despite the horrid issues within capitalism, it has stayed the prevailing economic system. And what better way to integrate yourself into the very capitalistic world than adopting a spirituality that is far more malleable than the traditional Protestant perspective? This is the ethos of this video, that capitalism is something that is extremely elastic. It is ever-changing. Therefore, our critiques, therefore, our analysis of it should adapt as well. This turns the original sociological inlook of capitalism from the Weber perspective on its head. Thus, our very perspective should adapt. Our political organization should adapt. We should understand the very non-material subliminal messages that are embedded within advertising. That new forms of aesthetics are okay. That new forms of social being are okay, so long as it does not interfere with the very material order and organization that surrounds us. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. I have one large request. This entire channel is completely fan-funded and what allows me to expand and honestly survive. If pledging a couple dollars isn't quite feasible, maybe consider using our Amazon affiliate link. I get a small percentage of whatever you buy off there, and more importantly, we can force Jeff Bezos to give money to poor content creators like me. To stay up to date, feel free to follow me on my socials on Twitter, Instagram, join the Discord server, and perhaps come hang out on Twitch. I stream a couple days a week. More than anything, I hope this video was entertaining and educational. Thanks so much.